introducing a very dear and close friend, a philatelist, an expert, and who has the most incredible, amazing collection from the Shoah, from the Holocaust. Bruce Chadderton from originally New Zealand and now in Australia. And Bruce, we first saw your collection in South Africa. I first saw it in 2010. And not only I, but everybody in SRP, we Side of Israel Philatelic, we were amazed to see this most incredible collection, and you were very kind to give us a copy of it, and it was put into a book called Descent into the Abyss. So Bruce, before we even start, can I ask you, what made you interested, coming from New Zealand, in the Holocaust?
I had a keen interest in history from that period of time, and read a lot about a lot of different subjects, and this was always something that interested me. Didn't really know enough about it, but 20 years ago my daughter at high school was being taught about Nazi Germany and the rise of Nazi Germany and the things they did, and this was one of the subjects they were debating, whether it had really happened, and if it did, how bad was it. And I suppose that offended me to a real extent, that that was even something people would question. So I set out to buy some material from a concentration camp initially, which I did, and build up a concentration camp mail collection just as a sort of...
Where did you get the material from?
Mostly off eBay. eBay just sort of started around late 1990s, so there was a lot of material coming up on eBay. Occasionally you got lucky in New Zealand, somebody would have some material, but that's mostly off eBay. And as I got to know the subject, I got to know what was good material and bad material, and soon worked out that there wasn't much of the Jewish history in that particular collection. And I was actually probably more interested in that side of it than the concentration camps per se, so that took me down a slightly wider path, which ended up being this exhibit. So that's how we arose.
Okay, so it is, I must just tell you before we start, whoever I've shown your book to and I've given your book to, there's just no words to describe the emotional when they see it, because you start from the beginning, you give the whole history, before the Holocaust occurred and after the Holocaust, the liberation. You go through the whole story of the whole epic journey of this terrible period of time in world and Jewish history, and you just show the evidence in your collection and in your book. It comes alive. You actually show material that actually is authentic and real. So to any Holocaust denier, they just have to look at either your exhibit or your book, and there's no denying it.
I still find a way. I see I'm quoted on the White Front website as another book writer, so
wow.
I don't care.
No, it's amazing. Okay, so if we can go through, this is the book that SRP actually published. And if you can just give a description of your most incredible exhibit. Okay,
so basically effectively the first two frames are sort of pre-war, largely pre the war period, so 1932 to 33 through to late 1939, and they really study the disintegration of human rights for the Jewish people in Germany and then Austria and the varied Allied countries. So we're talking about loss of jobs, loss of civil rights, loss of housing, the Nuremberg race laws, all of those various aspects that took Jewish life from a very vibrant part of the German community to being very much under significant pressure, both physically and mentally, I think, and that's what the first two frames are about. So we've got items like early concentration camp mail, and that early period wasn't really targeted specifically at Jewish Germans, more about if they were a communist or a social democrat, they might have ended up in a camp, but it wasn't really specifically targeting Jews at that stage. It was really aimed at underwhelming, undermining Hitler's political enemies. So those items are not Jewish at all. But I've got a very early cover from the Gestapo in April of 1933, not long after they're established, and they obviously went on to play a fairly major role in persecuting.
And can I just ask out of interest, where did you obtain this?
It came off Del Campo. The amazing thing about this is the stamps are perfect, POL, which was to protect them being stolen by their civil employees. You wouldn't have thought the Gestapo would need that, but
They actually made little perforations in the stem, so...
So we've got the Der Stürmer, which was the Nazi publication about that was very anti-Semitic, violently so. We've got the foreign exchange laws that came in, and basically the guidance on those was anybody sending money overseas was going to be in trouble because the Germans were trying to control foreign currency. But if your name was Jewish, every single letter you sent was checked, because the thought was that you were probably going to try and break the law. So that was the directive given when those laws came out. We've got a copy of the Nuremberg race laws here. That's an original out of one of the German law books.
Wow.
I had to buy a book that was about that thick with all of the laws for 1935 to get it, and then took the book to pieces. You've got the various propaganda things that went on at the time. The Ewig Jude, the exhibition. There was a little known exhibition put in a Masonic lodge that sort of tried to link Masons and Jews and the communists into this big evil group that was out to destroy Germany. So there was a special exhibition that ran for the exhibition ran for a long time, but the postmarks only existed for 2 days. So we've got examples of those. You've got the union with Austria.
That's the Anschluss.
That's the Anschluss stuff. And then further on through, we've got a similar thing happening with Czechoslovakia. The Evian conference, which was
in Evian.
In Evian in France, where they Roosevelt said, well, let's get everybody together and see if we can help the Jews in Germany and Austria. And then nobody did anything really. The reality was the Germans basically got free license after that point because nobody else was willing to take German or Austrian Jews into their communities. Australia took some, Bolivia took some, Paraguay took some, but very small numbers. And the UK then passed a law that allowed them to take children, unaccompanied children. So the kinder transports happened in 38 and 39, following on after this conference. You've got the compulsory name change thing that happened in 1938, where people had to register with specifically Jewish names. So they had to add those in, like Sarah and Isaac and Jacob were added in. If you went on the prescribed list of names, it got added in that way.
And can I just ask you, Bruce, is it true that I was in Klagenfurt now and they showed me a letter, and at the back of the letter is a name and they had to put next to the name Sarah?
Yeah, they had to insert Sarah
or Israel
into their name, yeah.
So I managed to obtain one,
So men had to, if their name wasn't on the prescribed list of Jewish items,
then they had to put Israel.
They had to put Israel, and if it was a woman, they had to put Sarah.
Sarah, yeah.
And then, of course, we had Kristallnacht, which was really the start of something extremely negative and much more targeted, because by this stage the world had said, well, we really don't care what happens. I have to be honest, that's pretty much what happened. So you had the persecution of the Jewish community expanding significantly at that point. So this actually item came out of my concentration camp mail collection. It's one of the few items I had that's.
And you have from Kristallnacht itself, from the actual.
No, this is from one of the Jewish guys that got imprisoned in the camps.
Wow.
In Kristallnacht, and in fact this particular cachet only appears on letters sent around that time from Jews, and it's basically saying pay your bills, because there was obviously the big levy going on to try and get everybody out. So there's 30,000 German Jews and Austrian Jews in concentration camps as a response, and the German government made the Jewish community pay $1 billion Deutschmarks fine, basically. And so they all were getting these sort of reminder cachets on the mail saying, hurry up and pay up. We talk about China a wee bit, because China was instrumental in, it was a free community. You could go to Shanghai. It was by that stage under control of the Japanese, and they were taking, I suppose, anybody into the community. They didn't have the same anti-Semitic rules. This particular postcard's the only one I've ever seen with a specific Jewish New Year message printed on the back. The guy that did it was a journalist and publisher in Shanghai at the time, who then later escaped into the US.
And this is where the whole story with Sugihara and Jonas Buitendijk, where they gave the visas to Carousel and the exit visas to Japan.
It was easy to exit to Shanghai via Italy than it was out of Germany. So often people would get themselves into Italy and then find their way across. The Lloyd Triestino line was running almost monthly cargo ships, liner vessels with refugees. And there's a timetable of those you can generally track. If you know the names, you can track who they are and what ship they're on. So.
And then later it went via from Moscow. They managed to get on to train from like Kovno to Moscow, and then to Vladivostok, and then to Tsuruga in Japan.
That's right.
And from Japan they went to Shanghai.
Yes.
Wow, it's amazing that you have a. This is incredible. Shanghai. Wow.
And then you have the kinder transports happening here. We've got a couple of items to children in from Czechoslovakia, or the protectorate as it became by that stage, in England. So unaccompanied children got sent on their trains to England and then assigned to some very good conditions, some very poor conditions. So this is a letter to a kinder transport person, one of the lucky children we got out.
So Bruce, when you walk around in Jerusalem, there are quite a few survivors from they call themselves the kinder, from the kinder transport. I have a few patients who are kinder transport, and you hear their stories, and it's sad because they say goodbye to their parents and they didn't know they were going to see them again, and in most cases they never saw them again.
This particular letter and another one I've got it from this young man's uncle, and he'd paid to get his son out, or paid to get his cousin, his nephew out, and he later passed away in Auschwitz, so that was sad. This particular letter at the top is addressed to the German Jewish Aid Committee in London. Again, it was associated with kinder transport. He was quite a wealthy industrialist, and he paid to get his son out, and then later managed to escape himself, so he was quite lucky. This piece of the framework here is really the removal of housing, the control of financial accounts, the loss of businesses, and then the fines that were being implemented against Jews trying to emigrate. So that's this sort of particular part through here. And it's amazing where you pick this material up. I think this item came out of New Zealand. This one I think also came out of New Zealand, and to work out its significance I had to do quite a bit of research.
It's amazing.
Names and locations.
The amount of research that you've done.
There's a lot of the information's available out there, and if you can get enough different sources or bits of it, you can cross-reference till you triangulate what the answer is. That's one of the challenges I set myself. Is if I get a name, I want to know what happened to them. And there's a lot of information available via Yad Vashem particularly. But books, I've got the Auschwitz Chronicle and the book on the Lodge Ghetto, and there's a lot of names in there, so you can track some stuff that way. And then from here on out, we're talking about the war period. So occupation of Poland, occupation of Europe, and I suppose specifically Poland in the first instance, because that was really the test as to whether Europe was going to wake up or do anything. And they really didn't. Everybody sat back after that and went, declared war, but we don't know what to do. So there's a bit of there's a few examples through there. France was an interesting case because the Foreign Legion had a lot of emigre Jews, particularly out of Russia, in their forces, and it was demanded by the Germans once they'd occupied France, and they gave them up, and they refused. And in fact, they registered them under different names. Well, they sent them out to some really obscure parts of the world, so that it was going to be very hard to find them. And there's a postcard at the bottom here which has been around just about every part of northern Africa, trying to track down. It's a postcard from Palestine to the French Foreign Legion, and it traces to France, then to Marseille where they embarked into northern Africa, then into northern Africa to the French Foreign Legion headquarters in northern Africa, and then around a whole lot of presumably small oases that they had soldiers stationed there. Never tracked them down, and was returned back to Palestine afterwards.
Wow.
This is perhaps one of mine. Probably one of the gnarliest items I've got, and I use that to explain the term gnarly, I suppose. Three I think presumably northern European Jews who found themselves in France during the Battle of France and are trying to escape. They're talking to the US consul that was famous for extracting a lot of them, about getting documents for the original documents have expired, and they're now writing to people in the US to try and get replacement documents so they can get out before the country falls to Germany. So it's a very rare censored letter, and the content of this is quite scary. And the reality is, in this letter they say, we apologise for this. It's not that we apologise for asking. It's not that we're bad people. It's just we're Jewish and there's no other hope for us. So it's a very it's a hard letter to read. Very emotionally tough. So that's from France.
And do you know the fate?
No, I haven't. I think one of them ended up in the French Resistance, so he must have escaped. But the other two names I've been unable to track. And Yad Vashem have got a wonderfully big database, but it's only about 50% of the 6 million recorded. So, and immigrant Jews didn't get tracked into the countries they were running into, so they might have disappeared out of Germany, ended up in Italy and got killed in Italy, but all they know is that they disappeared out of Germany.
What's very sad is the State Department made it very difficult for people to sponsor. You had to show your tax returns, it was very difficult.
That's right.
And it was very laborious, and they didn't encourage people to do it.
No, not at all. They were right against it.
Yeah.
So we've got more items around refugees. We've then got the move to get all the Jews out of Germany. So this postcode, whilst it's missing a stamp, it's a pretty common practice. There was a number of transports took all of the Jewish concentration camp prisoners that were now starting to appear in concentration camps, or were still there after Kristallnacht, took them out of Germany. So this postcard is one of those rare items. Specifically a Jewish guy, and he died in Mauthausen in Austria. We had wealthier.
Mauthausen was a labour camp as well.
It's a concentration camp.
But they made them work so hard that
they made them work. So it was designed to kill them
by working them to death. They had to go up a steep incline
160 to 169 steps. So they got to the top. They quite often pushed back into the quarry. The story goes that the guy that ran it basically said to the priests, "Don't expect to last very long." To the Jews, he basically said, "You might as well go and run into the wire because you're going to be dead inside a week." So, pretty brutal, and obviously sanctified state murder really is what that was about. And then of course you've got wealthy Jews, particularly German Jews, who have now set up businesses in places like the States, and who have got into Switzerland and are now sponsoring people to get them out. So this is a letter from the Wertheimers, who are quite a famous, they were a famous department store owner, to somebody in one of the camps which held Rhineland Jews in France, and they were trying to sponsor them out. Now, whether in this case they died again, unfortunately, time limits didn't happen. More examples of businesses being taken over, and then we get into the Russian campaign, which really often involved Romanian and Hungarian Jews being put into conscript labour into that country with no protection. They were often killed by. If they weren't killed by the Germans, they were often killed by the Russians because they were in a military uniform. A letter here that's pretty heartrending. The lady's writing to find out about her brother or her husband. I can't remember which way around it goes now, but he'd been conscripted into the Soviet military as a Jew out of the Ukraine. He'd then been captured by the Germans. He'd been seen locally by somebody that knew him and passed the fact that he'd been seen locally onto this lady who was writing to find out about him, but by this stage the Germans had shot all the Jews that they'd captured. So they were pretty brutal. They singled them out of the military. So we've got, I suppose the refugee story is pretty much told through here. People running away, and then you've got those that got out often ended up enlisting in the military forces. If they were young and fit, they were enlisted in the military forces. So you've got Britain, Canada, a whole number of nations, Russia of course, enlisting escaped Jews into their military force. And some countries already had a significant military presence. South Africa, for instance, had quite a strong Jewish military presence. From here on through, we're talking about occupied Europe. there's nothing much to do with anybody outside of it. It's the fact we've got the identification stuff, the stars that became mandatory, the registration papers. I've yet to track down an IBM pass card that they used to use to do all that process. I must admit that's something I'd like to do just for completeness. Labour assignments, compulsory and otherwise. And then obviously we get into the ghetto period where instead of having Jews scattered all over the countries, they were occupying the Germans, concentrated them in generally the poorest parts of the big cities, close to a railway and a road, so that they could transport them in bulk when they needed to. So Warsaw, Richmondstadt, Theresienstadt are the ones I've got good examples from.
And this one in Hebrew?
Yes, this one's in Yiddish.
In Yiddish, yeah. But with Hebrew script.
Yeah, written from Belgium to somebody in Palestine, and they've been sent the rules for corresponding with the people in the ghettos in Lodz, Liechtenstein in Poland. This was before Belgium was occupied, only a few weeks before. So the process had already happened. The establishment of the Judenrat, which were basically the government that was under the German government control. Here, postal services through this period of time, mail was very controlled. There weren't that many examples. You weren't allowed to write very often, and you paid for the process and the privilege, and writing non-German terms, asking for money, asking for medicine, asking for people to do other stuff, all meant that the mail never got sent.
And it's heavily censored.
Yeah, very, very heavily censored. So we've got a couple of examples here of mail that never got sent for different reasons. I've actually got the pass card for the lady that was a postmaster for the Jewish Kultuska mine in Prague. So she used to go and get all the mail for the Jewish aid agency that was based in Prague. They were allowed to keep functioning because of, I suppose it was politically essential for the Germans to show they were still doing something. So that these, particularly in Prague, this one kept going for a long period of time. So this is her mail pass, and on the back it shows each day that she's gone out and signed to receive the mail. We have final attempts to immigrate. This letter's written by a guy called David Stoliar, who was the only known survivor of the Struma, which was a ship that left, took Romanian Jews and then got blown up in the Black Sea by a Russian submarine. He's the only guy known to have survived. I had an item that went with it, which was a letter from a newspaper demanding payment for somebody's newspaper subscription, and they were on this particular vessel. But my mother-in-law, who didn't know anything about philately, found it on the table I was working on and threw it out thinking it was rubbish. So that's a bit gutting, but it happens. And then we talk about the Wannsee Conference, and well, this stage you'll notice it's starting to thin up a wee bit as an exhibit because there isn't a lot of Jewish correspondence available, and there's not really a lot that's public. So there wasn't a lot of written content around it. It was all agreed and planned, and but there wasn't a lot happening. You know, there's not a lot of written documents. There's certainly not a lot of philatelic stuff. So we've got examples of different postcards, firms that were involved in the work associated with the concentration camps, IG Farben being perhaps the most famous of them.
That's infamous. You know.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a much better word than I used. But they used the slave labour available to them in a number of places to make rubber and synthetic petroleum fuels. But they also had a part in Degussa, the company that made the Zyklon B gas. So they were a party of that company as well. So they either worked them to death or they made money by killing them as they came on the trains.
Degussa also made amalgamators.
Yes, okay.
Dental amalgamators, yeah.
So they, as I say, really sad that a big company like that could have no moral sort of compass at all. For a lot of time, the likes of Farben and IBM, who are another significant profiter from this whole process, really denied it and wanted to keep hushed up. So it's been good to see that sort of stuff coming out in the last 20 years and forcing them to take ownership of it. Some political stuff here, various in France and again in Germany, just propaganda stuff. a wee bit about resistance. There's no postal history out of the Warsaw Ghetto, for instance, during the time of the uprising. Earlier on, I've got a postcard sent by the sister of one of the leaders of it, but there's no mail that comes from that period. So when you're doing a postal history exhibit, really hard to find anything that's too relevant. The only thing I've been able to come up with is the J&F Ghetto fighter stamp that they used originally as a Cinderella, which was later able to be used during the interim period in Israel as a stamp. So that's the only example I can show of that.
Bruce, can I ask you, with the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, is it true that the amount of time that they resisted the Germans is longer than the French?
Yes, correct. Yeah. They were. Hitler was told it would be all over in time for his birthday, and in fact it was another three or 4 weeks later that happened, and I mean France lasted about 4 weeks.
And the Warsaw Ghetto was longer.
Yeah, and
it's quite amazing.
Concentrated in a very small area, basically surrounded by enemy, unarmed, largely unarmed, and just fighting a completely different fight against an enemy that's fighting under no rules, and they still survived the French. So
quite amazing.
Yeah. Bulgaria is an interesting case. They quite happily gave up the Jews and the territories they occupied, didn't give up any of their own at all, and in fact told the Germans they weren't interested. They conscripted a number of their men into labour battalions, but they only allowed them to work inside their own country. So they did a remarkable job of protecting, once they got themselves organised, of protecting the Jewish community. And I don't know if they did it out of self-interest, but there was a bit of politics behind it, from what I understand reading the books about it. But that's a pretty remarkable.
That was Bulgaria.
Bulgaria, yes.
They say Albania as well. Albania was.
Yeah, they will. Obviously, I've got nothing on Albania at all. This is probably the piece de resistance of my collection. This is the postcard sent by Ignaz Grunsfeld to Lazar Weisse, and the Weisse family is a family I managed to track down as part of my research for this. And we've had a pretty momentous reunion a couple of days ago. Reunion's the wrong word, but we got to meet each other, which was really nice. And I had another card, which I found subsequent to finding this one. I'd already offered them this one because I said that is really their family belongings, and they said no, you keep it. In fact, the word I was told was that the 4 aunties would fight over who owned it, so they didn't want it. But I've subsequently found another one and been able to pass it on to the family. So whether that fight happens or not, I don't know. But that's for them to sort out. But it was really nice to be able to give them some family history there.
And where do they live?
They live in and around Jerusalem, and there's one of the sisters lives in the US. But Sigmund, this is his uncle that's doing the writing, survived as a 16-year-old Auschwitz in a death march to Buchenwald, where he was liberated. And he lived in the States for a while, but he's been in Jerusalem for a long time.
So, Bruce, that story appears on the front page of Jerusalem Post today.
Yeah, I know, that's pretty special, really, to be honest. The one thing I'll say is I think is the Jerusalem Post probably got it slightly wrong. I mean, they showed the photo of this, which to me, the human interest is in Siggy. It's not in this at all. But, anyway, so be it. Under a bit of pressure from Sweden and Switzerland and Denmark, asking where are the Jews, the Gestapo came up with a thing they called Operation Mail, which allowed Jews in Theresienstadt and in the family camp in Auschwitz to write letters, very carefully controlled, non-concentration camp names. There was a labour camp this or so there's some examples of that there. It was really just a complete ruse, big falsehood to try and take a bit of international pressure off, because the war was starting to be lost by this stage. It had turned completely. And the last part of the exhibit, 1944 to 45, and he takes 4 pages. There's not a lot of information around. The Jewish community is largely gone from occupied Europe, with the exception of Hungary, which sort of in the middle of 1944 was under tremendous pressure, and about half of the Jewish population of Hungary was killed inside about 10 weeks. So there's these items of here, and then we get into the liberation period, which is the last 5. This particular photo here comes from a New Zealand military official who was sent.
Dakar.
Yeah, well, he didn't go to Dakar. He got put in a truck and got enough fuel, and they said go for a drive and see what you can see. And he found himself outside the camp of Dakar, which by this stage was controlled by the Americans, who didn't want them anywhere near the camp. But he was able to take photos from outside. So this was post the war, and I gave a talk on a small community in New Zealand. And he was in the audience, and he said, "Hang on a second, I've got this item for you. I'll send it to you. My family don't want it," and so then I got this off him, just as a gimme, which is it's pretty special.
And then here you Bruce, you give you list the countries and the pre-war population, the post-war, and the survival.
Yes, and you can see there's a lot of countries there that didn't do very well at all in terms of protecting the Jews. And as I say, the standout's Bulgaria, 100%. Pretty much they protected everybody that they had.
Lithuania is one of the worst. Lithuania and Latvia.
Oh yes, well they were rapidly.
They were actually. It was 10% survived, and in Latvia 11%.
In those countries, the Jews were seen as associated with the communists, and of course, when the Russians occupied those countries in 1940, they punished everybody in the population. So when the Germans came through afterwards, they assumed that the local population basically said, "Well, the Jews and the communists did all this to us," and so that led to some pretty rabid sort of civilian actions against their people, and then obviously the Germans did the rest of it. So it's pretty brutal. And then of course we've got the last bits here, which are about, I suppose, survival and escape, and that's what these are about. And the exhibit finishes at this point. I wouldn't read because it's in Hebrew.
Now, Bruce, in your book you have a most amazing story about the Son family.
Yeah, similar to the postcard back here, but we found a postcard posted out of Warsaw in 1941, and I tracked the receivers of it off Yad Vashem and found out who they were.
And you have the picture as well.
Yep. And so I contacted the guy that wrote the death record for the individual in Yad Vashem, and he was still at the same address some 15 or 16 years later, and was able to give him a phone call, and he answered, and we had this conversation, which was a bit weird because I didn't really know what I wanted to know, and he wasn't really expecting it. And he said to me, "Wow, that's the first time I've heard that guy's name in over 70 years." Wow. And it was his brother-in-law that had passed away. So we exchanged quite a bit of information, and over time it turned out that he'd been German. He was a German Jew himself.
I think they were musicians.
The brother was the guy on the postcard was a musician. He'd been kicked out of the orchestras in 1933, put into one of the Jewish. There was 3 Jewish orchestras permitted in Germany, and they actually got to tour the ghettos in occupied Poland in 1941. So that's where this postcard came from. They were housed in the ghetto, and then he got sent home, and about a year later put on a train with his wife and young daughter to Treblinka, I think it was, or Chelmno, one of the death camps, and subsequently passed away, which was not unusual, unfortunately. The young gentleman who I spoke to in the States had at 16 been sent out of Germany into France, and with a view to getting him safely in France. And then it had transpired that when Germany declared war on France, he was now an enemy alien. He got put in a camp, a prisoner camp or an internee camp, whilst they fathomed out what to do. In the meantime, his family had got visas to go to America. He's stuck in another country, so they had to go on their own without him. He then managed to journey with an uncle all the way down into Italy, and got the last boat that left Italy before Italy declared war on France. So pretty amazing that he survived that whole process, and 2 or 3 years later ended up flying mosquitoes against the Japanese over the Philippines. Wow. So he had a pretty busy pretty amazing 4 or 5 years.
How did you get a picture of the Sons? In the book you have a...
I've got a picture that came out of his archive. He shared his archive of photos that he had from it. So,
he must have been amazed that you are in New Zealand.
Yeah, he was. pretty amazed. I was amazed. He said, I don't normally answer the phone from numbers I don't recognise. He said, I don't even know why I picked it up, but he did, and we had this really good conversation. Really nice guy, and he was 92. I hadn't spoken to him for about a year. We kept in touch for a long period of time, but he was still doing witness work, I suppose, so doing Holocaust awareness to American military service at 1992. So yeah.
So Bruce, I mean, this is just phenomenal. This is years and years of research, and you can see you're so dedicated. It's unbelievable. What message can you give about, after all your years of research, and what message is there to give about
Well, the
this?
message is obvious. I mean, this happened. It's really hard for anybody to say it didn't. And you just can't string something together like this with a whole lot of different family names and different locations and then say, no, the Shoah never happened, or the Holocaust didn't happen. It definitely happened. Was it organised? Yeah, of course it was organised, and it was organised by the government. And there might have been a bit of freelance stuff that happened outside of it. It was a general framework. So to me that's really obvious. And the sad part of this is you go through the exhibit and you look at, I've got a letter in here from an 8-year-old boy who was writing from a Judenlager where he'd been sent in Yugoslavia. He never survived. In fact, he was allowed to write the letter. It was just a propaganda thing by the Germans. It's really sad to see that, because there's a whole... You think what contribution would 6 million people have made to the world over the last 70 odd years, 80 years, and that's the sad reality of it. That's a generation of brains that's never happened, and families that have been expunged, and it's cruel. Very sad.
And when you were reading some of these letters and they were translated, it must have been extremely emotional.
It's pretty harrowing at times. I think the postcard here is the last one that was ever sent. So sent weeks before he was due to die. I've got one at home that I don't show in the exhibit because it's been heavily scored on by different people. But it talks about don't bother writing to me because I won't be here next week.
Wow.
So this is a guy that's very aware of his impending demise. I haven't been able to track him specifically, so I don't want to use it in an exhibit. But it's a pretty tough thing to look at. So,
well, you've done a most amazing. Your work and your dedication is just speechless. It really is. We're so grateful to what you've done, and it's incredible, really. We just wish you all the muzzle. It's like all the blessings, Hashem's blessings, just to continue. You're doing such a tremendous service for the memory of these people. May the memory be for eternal blessing. And thank you so much for all your tremendously hard endeavors and work and research. You really are an example for all of us to emulate. Thank you so much, Bruce. I really appreciate it.